What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was neglected and raised by the Shinigami itself? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Sarutobi got there just as Minato was finishing the formation of seals. Hiruzen himself knew those seals better than anyone, for he was the one who taught them to Jiraiya and the latter one taught them to his student. But it seemed like Minato was the last one in this line. Sandaime knew that Shinigami won't allow him to live after this, and looking at the state Kushina was in, they were going to die together. Hiruzen hurried towards them, telling his backup team to stay back. The demon chakra was out of control and it looked like it kept hitting and crushing everything around it, but the third Hokage avoided every single slash. He didn't become a Hokage for no reason, after all. The waves that these hits caused, however, were strong enough to make his feel rather dizzy and even shudder a few times as he was coming closer to Minato and Kushina. It was clear that the Nine Tails was feeling that it was nearing its end and didn't pay attention to the surroundings. Now would be a perfect time to perform an attack from behind, but there was little to be done about this beast, and Minato was about to sacrifice himself to keep the village safe. But then something happened. Something that would later change Shinobi's world and make Naruto Uzumaki someone very, very different from what the prophecy has had for him in store. Because as his father was about to form last two seals, he performed the wrong seals, which would later be blamed on stress and shock, and these two seals meant that the part of the Nine Tails won't be sealed off inside Naruto. Sarutobi clearly saw the mistake that Namikaze did and the utter terror on his face. Was it the end? Did his small mistake result in Konoha's end? Before Hiruzen had time to call out Minato's name and help him and his family to get somewhere safe, the Shinigami in front of them began shrinking. Sarutobi and the Namikaze could only look up at it in confusion. Minato didn't finish the seal correctly, but it was likely that Shinigami was still going to ask for the payment, in other words Minato's soul, so something was definitely wrong. Along with Shinigami, the Nine Tails began getting smaller and smaller, too. Though it happened in a smoke of red and orange and it only took a few minutes for its yin part to be sealed off inside Minato, with the latter one violently coughing at the unexpected results. At least they managed to get rid of this half. Minato, I think it's working. The other half is getting sucked into the markings on Naruto's stomach. Shouted Kushina to her husband, for Kyuubi's chakra made it impossible for everyone to hear each other without shouting. She was, in fact, right. Pretty much following the example of its yin part. The yang part began to shrink. But Kyuubi still had enough time to attack Naruto. Kushina followed her motherly instinct when she jumped forward, thus preventing him from killing the baby, but so did Minato. So the two of them stood, covered in blood and swear, and the yang part was soon fully placed into Naruto with the markings on Naruto's stomach cooling down. Minato, Kushina, don't move, I will get help, announced Hiruzen loudly and was just turning around when he saw it. Shinigami, who was steadily getting smaller for the last couple of seconds, didn't back out of his previous task and sliced his sword through Minato's soul like one would cut a slice of meat for dinner, mercilessly and quickly. It made Minato cough with blood even harder and he would have fallen down if it wasn't for Kushina. She helped them to lay down as gently as possible. Minato, she whispered with a sob but couldn't avert her eyes from the picture in front of her. Hiruzen, get Naruto away from it. Her words were uttered too late. Little did she know that Minato accidentally sealed off the said Shinigami inside his son with those last two seals, and when the ground became to shake even harder and the moon was gone from the skies for a matter of a second, Shinigami was sucked right into that seal, along with the yang part of the Nine Tails. Minato and Kushina saw it all but were only able to utter their son's name before the blood loss was too great and their eyes closed, this time for the last time. Hiruzen stood there for a few seconds, gears in his herd working full on but not quickly enough to figure out what has just occurred and what to do with the baby. He could faintly hear people talking a few meters behind him, probably the squad that kept his back covered, but they weren't brave enough to approach him, and perhaps it was for the better. In fact, it would be much better to leave this scene as it is, because Sarutobi couldn't find it in himself to approach Kushina and Minato's lifeless bodies and take that poor baby away. No one yet knew what happened, only it seemed that Shinigami was placed inside the boy along with the Nine Tails, for some unfathomable reason. The silence didn't last for long because people seemed tired of waiting and Sarutobi could sense how Konoha was picking itself up. People were leaving their houses and began helping others by treating wounds and getting them to the only hospital in Konohagakure. The Nine Tails was gone as quickly as it appeared, though the remains of his chakra were still dancing on what remained from the big forest near Konoha's outskirts. He will have to call up Danzo and Anbu to get rid of this chakra before it hurt too many people, Sarutobi thought to himself solemnly and finally began walking towards the baby. The baby was smaller, far smaller than he remembered his own son, Asuma, and consequently Konohamaru to be. The markings on his stomach, now completely cold, looked like some religious tattoos that his own father and grandfather would get back in the days when God was looked up to and everything was done according to religion. There was just something that felt rather off about Naruto. That's what Kushina named him, right? He couldn't hold back a chuckle because he knew all too well where this name came from, and that it wasn't simply a type of ramen. He felt cruel about chuckling in a time and place like this, sickening, even, but he knew that the tears will come later. They always did. When Sarutobi bent down to pick up Naruto and get him out of here, he saw a bit of gray in the roots of Naruto's blonde hair. It was highly unusual because, as far as he knew, no one in Namikaze clan had gray hair, and neither did Uzumaki, not with their flaming red hair. He carefully stretched his arm and touched the gray roots with his fingertips, and suddenly it began spreading on the rest of his hair. It kept spreading and spreading until all of Naruto's hair was gray like that of an old man. And were those horns? Sandaime couldn't believe his eyes, so he picked him up and he even touched these horns with his fingers, but nothing happened. Again and again, but they felt and looked like horns that belonged to goats or some other livestock, but slightly longer with a slight curve at the end. It took Sarutobi a few minutes to finally figure out what was wrong, and that's when Naruto decided to wake up and open his eyes. And although his eyes were blue, much like Minato's, in fact, it didn't change the fact that the boy seemed to have no chakra whatsoever. He couldn't believe it at first because every living thing emitted some sort of chakra and he would have felt even its faintest note, but there was none. It was like he was holding a black hole in his hands, or a dead body, to be more accurate, but the boy simply couldn't be dead because here he was, blinking and breathing like any ordinary baby. Was it because of the Nine Tails and Shinigami? Did both of them actually enter his body? Sarutobi put the baby down on the rock and performed a streak of simple hand seals, a simple jutsu that would allow him to talk to someone a few miles away. Hyuga Hiyashi, I need your help. Sandaime-sama, of course. How can Hyuga help you? I need you to send here one of your finest men. I need to check something. I am at the spot where the Nine Tails was raging just a few minutes ago, but I'm sure you will be able to find me regardless if I tell you or not. Yes, I don't want you to doubt our abilities. Someone will arrive in a few minutes. It's simply too hard to find anyone in this mess. I see. Are there many victims? I cannot say for sure, but there are at least dozens of injured shinobi that are being brought to the hospital, regardless of whether they have pulse or not. I will report when everyone will be brought to the hospital and we will be able to see the damage. Understood. Thank you for cooperation, Hiyashi. I was born to serve this village, Sarutobi-sama. Sarutobi put his hands down, thus dissolving the jutsu, and called up the squad that came along. Satoshi, Hotaru, I trust you, with burying Minato and Kushina's bodies. The two exchanged glances, though it wasn't clear whether they were surprised, sad or indifferent due to their faces being hidden by masks. But when they spoke up, Hotaru and Satoshi kept their voices professional. Sandaime-sama, wouldn't that be impractical? We understand that those bodies belong to Hokage and his wife, but there are plenty more people who need our help out there. The silence that took place after that said it all, and Satoshi nodded at Hotaru with the latter one bowing in front of Sarutobi. Consider it done, Sandaime-sama. Would you prefer a closed coffin or? He frowned and scratched his forehead because he didn't think there was a need to discuss this sort of thing and make arrangements. In fact, he never expected that his student would die right in front of his eyes, but destiny was a cruel thing and it liked throwing surprises at him whenever he felt like his life was at ease. A closed coffin. Show a little of respect to your Hokage, he said at last and dismissed them with a swift hand gesture. Without wasting any time, they approached Minato and Kushina. Satoshi coughed and muttered a soft apology, after which he quickly took off his cloak and put it over Kushina's body. He looked down at the body of the ex-Jinchuriki for a moment and then carefully picked her up, minding her long hair even though it no longer mattered if he was tugging too hard on it or not. For Hotaru, the task was a bit different, picking up someone who was the head of the village, even if for a short time, and gave out your every single order was life-shattering. Unlike his partner, he only bent down to close Minato's eyes, which made him look like he was sleeping. He then put his arms under his back and legs and lifted Minato Namikaze in the similar manner as he picked the lifeless bodies of his comrades so many times before. Sarutobi watched the scene with a frown, his thoughts running at 1,000 miles per hour. He instructed the rest of his squad to avoid touching Naruto because he had some suspicions regarding him on his own. If both Nine Tails and Shinigami got sucked into his body, what on earth was happening to him and his chakra? It wasn't some ordinary fluctuation or whatnot. That much Sarutobi knew, so there was a slim, but a possibility nevertheless that the Kyuubi and the Death God cancelled each other out, and the fact that they both existed in one body made the whole chakra production thing impossible. He only waited for another 10 or so minutes when he felt someone else's present. The rest of his squad already left with Kushina and Minato, so now it was only him standing over the baby who was unnaturally quiet. He knew who came even before turning around. "Good to see you, Hyuga. I asked for the best and they sent you. And I'm glad I can serve you, Sandame-sama," the younger man replied with a bow, and Sarutobi could only think of annoying it should get to always act respectfully towards someone who was no longer your Hokage, but still held some power over you. "What would you like me to do?" "Check if this child over here has flows of chakra running through him and tell me if anything is wrong or different with its pathways inside boy's body." Hiruzen voiced his basic instructions and stepped back, watching Hyuga do his job. In turn, he stepped closer and activated his eyes, looking down at Naruto and squinting in the process. A few seconds passed and then the Hyuga prodigy deactivated his bloodline ability and blinked, his eyes no longer deep in concentration. He looked at Hiruzen in pure confusion and shook his head. "I saw something, but it can't be true." Sarutobi resisted rolling his eyes at those words. Yeah, that boy was definitely no ordinary boy. "If you should know, this is Naruto Namikaze, who you will from now on refer to as Naruto Uzumaki to avoid unnecessary attention. And he is the reason that there is no longer a raging Nine Tails in the process of destroying Konoha. This small human being is the vessel of the Kyuubi and will continue to be one until the day that he dies, so any weirdness and uncertainty can be applied to this child." The member of the Hyuga clan looked shocked, but he quickly overcame it and coughed a few times, clearing his throat and getting rid of the awkward atmosphere. "I see. Sandame-sama, this child, he has no chakra. Instead of chakra pathways, there is a big black hole that makes my eyes burn every time I look at it and makes everything inside me turn cold. It's like as if I was looking into death's eyes without knowing." Sarutobi hummed at the unusual description and looked down at Naruto. "A black hole? I understand that the seal has just been placed on him, but it's not possible that all traits of the Nine Tails chakra are gone for the time being. Are you sure you don't see any red or orange chakra remains?" "No, Sarutobi-sama. I'm positive that I only saw a big black hole. Perhaps someone put a jutsu that erased the Nine Tails completely, if it's possible?" It was as Sarutobi feared. Shinigami got sealed off inside Naruto, because there was no other explanation to why the boy had a glaring black hole inside him. Perhaps Shinigami's power outshined that of the Nine Tails, so even with Byakugan, Hyuga wouldn't be able to see it, and only saw death instead, which would be what Shinigami would want in the first place. There was also a possibility that Shinigami did something to the Nine Tails, what with his godly powers and all. Even tailed beasts wouldn't be able to do anything against gods. But what were the chances, really? He just had to talk to someone who knew more about tailed beasts than others, and he knew exactly who to ask for help. "I appreciate your effort. You are now dismissed," Hiruzen said without sparing Hyuga another glance and, with a swift, "hi," he was gone. Jiraiya didn't utter a word as his student's body was placed in a coffin, but not before it was thoroughly washed and cleaned. Why? To make him look better for himself? No one was going to see his face after this coffin was closed, so Jiraiya simply couldn't comprehend why were they doing it in the first place. It was an extremely odd thing to do. When he got the letter 2 days ago, he was just in the process of crossing the land of Wave and already heard a few rumors that Konoha was shaken with Kyuubi's attack. Back then, he didn't believe those rumors and laughed them off because they sounded too absurd to his ears. But when he got a letter from the village that he grew in, stating that Kyuubi is once again sealed but at a great cost, he left Wave in a hurry and spent the major part of last 2 days on his feet. As he arrived, he was encountered by 5 ninjas who told him to follow them because Sandaime Sama, and now, a Hokage once again, wanted to see him. He complied and spent the whole walk thinking over why would Sarutobi want to see him. Did Kushina die? Most likely not, seeing as everyone from Uzumaki clan had strong genes and extracting Kyuubi from them wouldn't result in Jinchuriki's immediate death. Did Minato die? Just as unlikely. What with Konoha's strong ninjas who could have come up with a way to tame the beast, and this, in turn, would allow Minato to take things into his own hands. However, when he walked into Hokage's office and saw 2 coffins of the ground, still wide open for anyone to see who is inside, he found that, for a second, he couldn't breathe. The last time he saw Minato and Kushina was with Kushina being pregnant and both of them asking for his advice on parenting and sealing off the Kyuubi if he manages to leave Kushina's body when she gives birth. Now, however, he was presented with 2 dead bodies of people he cared so much about and even considered his family. It would take anyone's breath away, even for a moment. A few minutes later, 4 civilians, judging by the way they were dressed, entered the room and, after receiving a nod from Hokage, closed the coffins and carried them out of the cabinet without another word. Jiraiya found it hard to look away, but when he did, his eyes were full of guilt and he had no idea what to say next. Seeing his state, Sarutobi gently offered him to sit down and then proceeded to explain the events from the moment Kushina was about to give birth. Jiraiya listened carefully, and when Sarutobi was finishing off his story, he decided to ask the question that bothered him from the very moment that he left the Wave Country. Sarutobi, so is the boy, Naruto, alive now? Yes, he answered truthfully and clicked his fingers. Suddenly, every single window in Hokage's office was open and in came 3 Anbu ninjas with one carrying Naruto in his arms. Jiraiya, this is Minato and Kushina's son. Would you like to hold him? Jiraiya didn't say anything, only nodded, and stood up to take the baby in his own arms. Only after Anbu left and all windows were closed once again did Jiraiya decide to lift up the blanket and look at the boy's face. He held back his surprise, but his eyes widened and he had to blink a few times, to make sure he wasn't just imagining things. Gray hair, which was actually more white than gray, looked very much like his own hair, or that brat's Kakashi. Small horns looked fake and Jiraiya had to nudge them, because it looked like a pair of fake horns that kids would wear on festivals, but no, they were very much real and growing out of boy's head. The whisker marks on boy's face were probably because of Kyuubi and were most likely going to stay on his face for the rest of his life, by the look of it. The color of his eyes was, perhaps, the only normal thing about Naruto. It had the same shade of blue as Minato's eyes did. Only then did Jiraiya realize that the boy was awake, but he wasn't making any noises. He simply stared at Jiraiya and laid completely still. So you are saying that Shinigami got sealed off inside him as well? Jiraiya asked carefully, looking up at his teacher. It seems so, but I have no idea why he is still placed inside Naruto, Sarutobi answered truthfully. After all, he is a death god. He can do almost anything he wants and I kept thinking that he will simply kill Naruto off and free himself, yet here he is, right inside this small child. I can only assume that he gained those thorns and this gray hair because of Shinigami and he might go back to looking like an ordinary child if we were to extract Shinigami from him. Jiraiya nodded and wiggled his fingers before Naruto's face, but the latter didn't show any sign of acknowledgement and continued blinking in complete silence. It was kind of scary. So when are you planning to extract him? Excuse me? Well, when are you planning to extract Shinigami from his body? He isn't going to stay inside his body for long, right? Jiraiya asked and tentatively placed his other arm under the child's neck to keep his head from lolling to the side. Tired sigh and Sarutobi scratched his forehead. Jiraiya, you should understand the complexity of this situation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but are you hesitating here? Jiraiya couldn't believe his ears. How could someone as loving and caring as him even think over it? There was no way in hell letting Shinigami stay inside Naruto was a good idea. Jiraiya, I ask of you to listen to me. Hiruzen could see that Jiraiya was getting angrier with every moment, and this was completely understandable, but he had to think as a Hokage and act as one. As much as it hurt him to place this boy's life into the very hands of death, he had no other choice. Sarutobi thought over what could be done again and again in the last 2 days, and the only coherent thought, quite ironically, came from Danzo, the man he tried to avoid talking to at all costs. I don't care what you are about to say, here is Sensei, but you will get rid of him, right? This is Minato and Kushina's baby we are talking about. The 2 people who gave up their lives to save this village and its citizens. And so did many others. You weren't here to see all these people who laid down their lives for this village. I don't give a crap about other people. I'm asking you when you will remove Shinigami from Naruto's body, so he can live a more or less normal life with the 9 tails sealed off inside him. I will stay here and make sure the seals never break, and in return you ensure that no one gets to know the full truth about the boy. As I said, this matter is rather complicated, Jiraiya, and if we were to extract Shinigami from Naruto, this would inevitably lead to consequences much worse than those we can imagine. I ask of you to forget about removing Shinigami from Naruto's body for his own safety. This sort of thing has never happened before, and he might very well die if we, indeed, remove Shinigami, or cause some other side effects. You don't want this boy to go blind or deaf, or something even worse, do you? Without meaning to, Jiraiya clenched one of his hands into a fist and looked at Sarutobi, his face as serious as ever. He just couldn't fathom that his very teacher, the man that practically rose him, Tsunade, and Orochimaru, could say such things. Leaving Shinigami inside the boy? But it would mean hell for him. He will never live a normal life, and Kami knows how many people will be after him after they find out that the death god resided within some guy's body. And people will find out, there was no way to keep it secret until the boy died 70 or so years from now. And what if he died before them? Would Shinigami and the 9 tails be freed once again? Besides, Sarutobi continued, we have never encountered case like this before. We don't know which seals have Minato changed in the last few moments, so it would be nearly impossible to find a counter jutsu to it. If we try to find a way, it might take us months, years, even, and by that time you might start thinking that maybe, freeing Shinigami isn't the best idea, and Naruto might get used to him. Think about it from my point of view, Jiraiya, and think of those that will be harmed if not only Shinigami, but the 9 tails will be released due to our interference. But I have to warn you that we won't allow you to disappear with this child no matter what, which I'm sure you might attempt, though you can stay here, in Konoha. And you can help Naruto in keeping both the 9 tails and Shinigami at bay by raising him. Raising him? Jiraiya repeated after his teacher. How could I possible? I have never. So what? You think Minato and Kushina would want someone else to raise their child, because think again. They wouldn't want anyone but the man who practically rose Minato and treated Kushina like a stepdaughter. Sarutobi stood up and walked towards the window, looking over Konoha and thinking of the uncertain future. I would ask my own wife to help in raising him, but she died on the day of the Kyuubi attack, and I can't possibly raise him on my own. As a Hokage, I have plenty of responsibilities and a high position to uphold. If you agree to stay and raise him, the Anbu will always be at your side and I will always be there to help. A short pause passed between the two and Jiraiya stood next to his teacher, his mind full of thoughts and doubts and so many regrets he felt like suffocating, but by now he was used to it. He was used to this sorrow and sadness over losing someone precious. Why me, though? You know that I hate staying at one place. I like to travel and train, and it would be accurate to refer to me as a perfect example of a hermit. No matter how much of a hermit you claim yourself to be, you aren't one, not with Tsunade, Minato and Kushina. Minato and Kushina are dead, and I have no idea where Tsunade is. It would take me a good few months to find her. Jiraiya answered truthfully and smirked at the look on Naruto's face. The boy seemed completely entranced with what was happening outside and he even stretched out his small chubby hand to touch the window. His expectant gaze was killing Jiraiya on the inside. It was as if the boy was waiting for someone to put a hand on the other side of the window. The boy obviously craved contact which, Jiraiya noted bitterly, was very unlikely in the next few years. So what was better, abandoning all of it and leaving for one of his countless trips, or staying here and raising Kushina and Minato's son, like they would want him to? If I leave, will this boy be placed in an orphanage? Most likely, yes, even though I will try to look after him. And the occasional Anbu, just to make sure the seal doesn't waver. At that moment, Jiraiya hated his own teacher more than he hated Kyuubi and everyone who were involved in capturing him to use him against Konoha. It wasn't a surprise to him that Sarutobi would choose something like this, not really. Jiraiya himself was raised in times of war and most people he knew didn't have parents and were raised in orphanages or some very distant relatives. What did he have to lose, really? Minato and Kushina themselves called him Naruto's godfather. Perhaps, just before they died, they really did want him to raise Naruto, to see his first steps, hear his first words. The quiet voice inside his head chanted, he might be the hero in the prophecy, but he was tired. So tired of being disappointed every time potential hero turned out to be just an ordinary ninja. He was absolutely certain that Minato was the chosen one, and look what happened. He died to save the village. Yeah, maybe he changed the history of Konoha by saving it, but saving a village in the Fire Country wasn't going to have a big impact on the rest of the world. But then again, what did he have to lose by staying here? He would still be able to continue writing, and looking after Minato's child was probably beneficial for everyone. Alright, Hokage-sama, I will stay in Konoha. And raise Naruto. Naruto, now 4.5 years old, skipped down the street with a balloon in his hands. He whistled a song under his nose and tried to think of what he and Jiraiya were going to do tonight, instead of paying attention to the hateful looks that were thrown his way. He never understood them, not really, and both Jiraiya and the Hokage refused to tell him why people hated him so much. Was it because of his white hair? But many people he knew had white hair, like his old man and the Jonin that occasionally dropped by at their place, Hitaki Kakashi. Or maybe it was because of his horns because normal people didn't have horns, right? Normal people had ordinary head and ordinary hair, and they weren't stared at whenever they walked down the street. He shook his head and thought of how good today was going to be. He and old man were going to see fireworks tonight and then go out for ramen in his favorite place, Ichiraku. Well, he called it, going out, but he was the only one enjoying Ichiraku's ramen. Meanwhile, his old man kept staring at women with big chests and, giving out that weird giggle of his, wrote something in the small book that he always carried around. Naruto told him to stop doing it, on many occasions, actually, but never did, and Naruto began noticing that people gave his old man some weird looks and some ladies even hit him whenever he was acting particularly weird around women. He ran past a playground and, not listening his inner voice, decided to look who was playing there anyway. He didn't know the names of most of those kids, but he managed to find some familiar faces, Shikamaru and Choji. And that arrogant Uchiha kid. Before he was able to look away, Sasuke turned around and their gazes met. A pair of blue staring into a pair of black eyes. Neither said a word, and even if they did it there was a good 20 meters between them, so they would have to shout to be heard. And words weren't needed in any case, just their postures said it all. Naruto disliked Sasuke because he was a know-it-all genius and Sasuke probably disliked Naruto because Naruto was one of the few people who didn't care which sort of family Sasuke came from. In his opinion, being an Uchiha or Hyuga didn't mean anything, and neither did coming from some big and strong clan. What mattered was the sort of person you were. Naruto aimed to be as strong as his old man was when he grew up. He had a dream and was ready to give it his all to achieve it. What did Uchiha Brat dream of? Becoming stronger than his brother? Succeeding as an Uchiha and making his parents proud? Whatever it was, Naruto didn't see it as being worthwhile. Sasuke couldn't possibly understand what it was like to have a big dream because everything was given to him on a saucer with a golden platter. He once told Gigi about what he really thought about Uchiha Sasuke, and he laughed for 3 straight minutes. After he stopped and took a breath, Jiraiya explained to him that hating anyone is wrong. Hating anyone didn't make you a better person. In fact, it made you look like someone weak who isn't able to live his life without being dependent on a low emotion that was titled hate. Jiraiya also claimed that, being a complete child, Naruto knew nothing about hate and had better things to do in the meantime than hating on the Uchiha heir. Still, Naruto couldn't resist sticking his tongue out at Sasuke and quickly running away before he was seen by any of the parents who, he had no doubt, would give him some bad glances once again. He ran for the rest of the way and only stopped when he reached his destination, Yamanaka Flowers. Its owners, Inoichi and his wife, Nariko, were one of the few who didn't look at him like he was a demon, clad in human flesh. Sometimes he was particularly lucky as Inoichi has some spare dango and shared it with Naruto. He hoped that today was one of those days. Inoichi-san, Nariko-san. He shouted out and opened the main door, the bell over it ringing to alert the shop owners that someone just came in. He didn't want the balloon in his hand to get in the way, so he tied it to a nearby chair. However, neither Nariko nor Inoichi came out to meet him. In fact, he heard someone talking in the back room, but they didn't seem to have heard his arrival. He smiled and skipped towards it, looking into the small crack in the wall. He was surprised to see Yamanaka Nariko talking to some girl with pink hair. That girl didn't look older than himself, and Naruto leaned on the wall, listening in and trying to see as much as he could from his current position. "Won't like it?" asked the little girl. "Why won't she like it? She is your mom, after all. I'm sure that she will feel incredibly happy and thankful for receiving a beautiful bouquet from her daughter," said Nariko and patted Pinkette on the head. She lowered her head and nervously intertwined her fingers, looking down. What if she will think that it's too much? Dad doesn't buy her many bouquets, it's usually jewelry and sweets. In this case, she will be more than happy to get some flowers from you. And if you are feeling uncertain, why won't you ask one of your friends for advice? I'm sure a beautiful girl like you has many friends, dear." "I don't have friends, Yamanaka-san." Nariko clapped her hands. "You know what? I'm sure that Ino and you will become great friends if you talk. I can help you by telling Ino that some girl with bubblegum hair dropped by and said that the bouquets that Ino arranged look absolutely stunning." "Oh, but you can't do that. That would be lying, and I don't want to lie to anyone. And I'm sure that she will say the same thing as everyone else, that I have a big forehead." That was the moment Naruto's nose decided to itch and, not being able to stop himself, he sneezed, loudly enough so that people outside the shop could hear his sneeze. He quickly stepped back and tried to breathe as quietly as possible, but it was pointless and he knew that. A moment later, the door that led to the back room was wide open and Naruto was facing the annoyed Nariko. The pink-haired girl stuck her head out and was eyeing him in pure curiosity. "Naruto, what did I tell you about sneaking around? That it's a stupid thing to do and that I should never do it again?" he asked cheekily and scratched the back of his head. "Anu, Yamanaka-san, where is your husband? Did you come here for dango?" Nariko asked with a soft chuckle and Naruto vigorously shook his head, his white hair hitting his face in the process. "Nah, I was just wondering. Gigi asked me to pick up 2 bouquets, for..." He made an uncertain gesture, knowing that he can't say, "Mom and Dad," in front of the pink-haired girl, and anyone else who didn't already know about his real parents. "Ah, I see. Well, then, let's go and pick up 2 best bouquets for you," she said cheerfully and clapped her hands, telling him to follow her. Naruto looked back at the girl with bubble gum hair and raised his eyebrow. Was she just going to stand there? Feeling his gaze on her, she jumped up and quickly left the back room, walking out of the shop as swiftly as she could. The door after her closed, but not before she uttered, "Goodbye, Yamanaka-san." Naruto shrugged and followed Nariko, standing right next to the counter and patiently waiting for her to pick up the best flowers. Naruto watched as she walked towards the front of the shop and elegantly picked up white chrysanthemum. The loving look on her face and her caring nature were something Naruto always admired, and he liked to think that his deceased mother had a similar character to Nariko-san, at least when it came to flowers. Whenever Naruto asked Jiraiya about his parents, the latter only gave him some brief descriptions, like, "She was very lively," or, "He was calm most of the time." Naruto didn't even hope to ever hear about their missions, how they met, and other things that seemed so insignificant, yet meant so much to the boy. It didn't take her too long to finally compose 2 bouquets, so when she returned to the counter and placed them in his hands, he took out a crumbled banknote from his pocket and gave it to her. "Thanks, Yamanaka-san. It's not a problem, Naruto. Don't forget about your balloon on the way back." He left the shop with balloon and flowers, and to anyone else it would look like he was attending a friend's birthday, but they would be far from right. The fact that he and Gigi were about to go to cemetery didn't make him sad. It never did, because Naruto never saw it as something negative, hence he never understood why people cried whenever they visited cemetery. He didn't mourn the dead. He was happy that he could visit them and have a spiritual connection between them, even if it lasted for an hour or so. He could swear that he felt his parents' presence every time he and Gigi paid their graves a visit, and it was getting stronger with each one of their visits. He hoped that one day it will be strong enough that he will be able to actually talk to them. He didn't remember the exact day he was told that his real parents died when the village was under some monster's attack. Gigi just mentioned it during lunch and they continued eating like it wasn't a big thing. Later on, Naruto asked Jiraiya more about his parents, but there wasn't any extreme need to know more about his deceased parents, and he assumed it was because Gigi sort of replaced his parents for him. He did everything that Naruto expected an ordinary parent to do. Taught him how to eat, talk and manners, among other things, like taking him out to play in a park or spend weekends outside Konoha. Both of them liked to travel, so weekends like this were a big treat to Naruto. It didn't take him long to reach his house, and as he was running up the stairs, he heard his old man shouting. "Gaki, Kakashi told me what you and Kiba did yesterday. Come here." Naruto yelped and almost let go of his balloon, but composed himself in time. Okay, so he had a choice. He could either leave these things behind and run far, far away from Konoha and the Fire Country altogether, or he could face it like his imaginary cold and cool self. Out of the two, he chose the smartest option. He took off in an unknown direction, his legs moving at incredible speed. However, he simply overlooked the fact that his godfather wasn't just anyone. He was one of the 3 Sannin, and him running away wouldn't stop Jiraiya from capturing him. A few moments later, he appeared before Naruto with a simple poof. Before Naruto was able to escape him by running back, Jiraiya grabbed him by his collar and lifted him from the ground. "Gaki," he shouted with a mad smile. "I told you not to run away from me because it's absolutely pointless and a pure waste of my chakra. Haa, let go of me, old man." Naruto shouted and began wiggling out of Jiraiya's hold, although they both knew that it was a playful struggle. "I told you not to be so arrogant and you knew of the consequences even before doing it, Naruto, both you and Kiba. I'm just wondering what made you think that filling Hokage's cabinet with a whole bunch of tadpoles will be funny for anyone but you two? Hey, we didn't harm them. We brought them inside Hokage's office in fish tanks and then left them there. It was a harmless prank, old geezer." Jiraiya sighed, face-palming himself and shaking his head. Damned be the day he decided that parenting someone who had Kushina's genes was a good idea. "Now listen here, Gaki. I'm not asking you where you discovered these tadpoles and how you and Kiba managed to get them inside Hokage's tower without being noticed, although I have to admit that this was a well-thought plan. Anyway, I only wanted to know why you did this. I know that Kiba did this because his older sister didn't get the B-ranked mission she wanted last week, but you." Naruto finally wiggled out of Jiraiya's tight grip and took a few steps back, eyeing the Sannin with cautiousness. He crossed arms over his chest and frowned. "I had my reasons, Gigi. Hokage isn't as good as you think he is." Is that so? Are you sure you don't want to tell me?" "Yeah, definitely? Yeah, alright then. And here I thought you were going to tell me. We would visit you parents and we will get some ice cream on the way back." Jiraiya could almost feel the way Naruto perked up at the mere mention of word ice cream. This time of the year was particularly boiling in Konoha, so anything that was sweet and made the weather more bearable was a treat. If Hiruzen found out that he was feeding a young boy with only ramen and sweets, he was going to get one of the countless lectures on parenting, so they had to be careful. Naruto licked his lips and wiped the sweat off his forehead, his mind buzzing with ideas and possibilities. To give in or to stand his grounds? To spill the beans and get a reward and keep silent and be left without sweets? As stubborn as he was, Naruto usually gave up when it came to sweets, or food in general, for that matter, which is why Jiraiya often compared him to Choji and others from Akamichi clan, though Naruto didn't see what was so bad with it. So he liked to eat. Which sane person didn't? "I will tell you, Gigi," Naruto said at last. "But you promise not to laugh or tell anyone. Even that weirdo Kakashi, okay?" Jiraiya raised his eyebrow, wondering what could possibly be so bad that Naruto told him not to talk about this with Kakashi, of all people. He wasn't the one to gossip to begin with. Besides, if Kakashi did find out and tell Sarutobi or anyone else, no one would believe him due to his shabby image. "Okay, I promise," he said and proudly placed his palm over his heart. Naruto was at that age where Jiraiya simply had to give in from time to time, and now was one of those times where he had to allow Naruto to be the loudmouth and the idiot that he was. "Fine," Naruto grumbled and shifted his weight from his right leg to his left, walking around like he was jumping from rock to rock and falling was equal to losing. I overheard some guys talking about Sarutobi being stronger than you, but I didn't get to kick them because Choji, Kiba and Shikamaru dragged me backwards. They said that it will get me into a big trouble and you will be sad. We usually don't go to see mom and dad when you are sad, so I had to step back. Kiba came up with a plan to show everyone that Hokage wasn't that strong and that he doesn't see everything that happens in the village. Holding back his laughter, Jiraiya scratched his head, just one of the habits that he picked up from Naruto, and said with a straight face, I see. So you decided to take a revenge on me? Hell yeah, 'cause you are my old man. Don't swear, boy. Who even taught you swear words? I just heard someone saying it, so I figured you won't mind if I use it a few times. You won't tell anyone about it, remember? Jiraiya nodded and pointed towards two bouquets, with the balloon being long gone somewhere in the skies. Don't worry, Gaki, me and other ninjas don't usually sit in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, and neither do we talk about you and your pranks. Now pick those up, I don't want them getting too dirty, and let's go. I bet Kushina will be angry for waiting for you so long. White chrysanthemum that Nariko Yamanaka picked out for him looked incredibly good, lying next to Minato and Kushina's graves. If Naruto had a choice, he would have picked out orange or red flowers, just like his mom's hair color, from what he could see on the few photographs that he was given by Jiraiya. They were bright and practically screamed, flamboyant, yes, but so did his mother's hair. In fact, even yellow would do. The same shade as his father's hair. He still didn't know why on earth he had white hair instead of it being blonde or red. Oh, how cool would it be to have red hair? Either way, he didn't like the fact that the flowers just had a white or pale yellow chrysanthemum. They were just too pure and too out of place. Why did they have to be white? Naruto coughed before lowering himself and sitting down on his knees before his parents' grave. Jiraiya left him alone, saying something about checking up on an old friend, whatever that meant, so Naruto didn't have to speak to his parents silently. He liked to speak to them like they were here, with him. He closed his eyes and put his vivid imagination to work, making the faces inside his head, the photos that he could recall at any time or the day or night without a fail. Mom, Dad, he said and paused, I have caused Gigi a lot of problems lately. I heard some adults talking about some puberty thing. At first I thought it was a sort of meat, but Gigi explained to me that it happens to everyone when they turn 12, at the same age that they become genins. You know, I want to become a genin. I don't think about becoming a chunin or jonin, because I just want to become like Gigi, and he told me that having a high rank didn't mean anything. All I have to do is practice every day, go to a lot of missions and beat, he covered his mouth, the crap out, he put his hands down, out of bad guys. I will definitely find the guys who were responsible for Demon's attack, Mom, Dad. I don't think much about it and it's okay if I never find them, if it means that Konoha is protected. You would want me to live a safe and peaceful life, right? So I will become one of the strong guys and find those that I need to protect, like both of you did. I will travel a lot, and try out lots of different food, seeing as you named me after ramen, Datbayo. When I become a genin and go to missions, you'd like me to do it, right? Right? He stopped talking, his mind running all over the place as he simply didn't know what to talk about. There were too many things he wanted to say, but none of them would come out right. He nervously tugged on his white hair and took a deep breath. What would his parents want to hear? I don't have many friends, ya know. It's 'cause most adults don't like me for some reason and they tell their kids that they can't play with me. It's stupid, right? Just because I have horns and white hair. I'm sure there are some other people out there who have weirdnesses, too. And why is it weird for me to have horns and it's awesome for Uchihas and Hyugas to have some strange eyes? I mean, that Sharingan is black spots on red that keep spinning, how is that cool? And what's with those white eyes that Hyugas have? Biway. Anyway, I don't like other kids that much. I hang around with Choji and Kiba and sometimes Shikamaru, but only when he isn't being his usual self and just lays everywhere he sees, staring at skies and talking about clouds. There are some other guys that I see in the park, but they are nasty and they make fun of other girls. You wouldn't want me to make fun of girls, right, Mum? But after the time I got into a fight because I was defending girls, neither of the girls thanked me for doing so, can you imagine it? They always ignore me and their parents always gossip about me, like I am not there or something. Would you want me to make them look? To pay attention to you? Naruto opened his eyes and jumped up, his head spinning because he felt dizzy for getting up so quickly. He looked around, but there was no one, in fact, There seemed to be no one in the cemetery besides himself and Gigi, who was gone somewhere. He blinked a few times and called out, "Who's that?" "I'm not out there, I'm inside your head. Think, instead of speaking out. Who are you? Guess." There aren't many who would prefer to sit inside your head and talk to you instead of having their own share of peace. I know you enough from all these years to be certain that you won't keep calm until I tell you. I don't know, it can be anyone. I might be talking to myself without meaning to. So you think that I'm your future self? Or your smarter self? Yeah, maybe. Stop asking me and show yourself. I would show myself, but at this age it will kill you. We will have to wait until I can show myself. For now, you can only know my name. Human beings refer to me as Shinigami. Shinigami? Is it some ghost from the past? I've never heard about Shinigami. Quiet chuckle. Silly human. Shinigami is a god of death, the one that can take one's life to take away their opponent's life. I am a creature that not many are brave enough to summon, someone horrifying enough that some people would be scared to even utter my name. I am someone who consumes souls without giving anything in return, child. Then why are you inside my head? What do you need from me? This isn't something that you need to know, not yet. You only need to remember my name and that I am not here for long. I would have appeared much quicker, but your child's mind was not able to comprehend my speaking until this very moment. Now that I am able to communicate with you, everything will be much easier. Many things that didn't make sense to you before will make sense now. What, like? Why people avoid me and even occasionally spit on me? Yes, you just have to wait and all of your questions will be answered. But, why are you still inside me? I mean, you are a god, can't you just teleport somewhere else or something? Sigh. You aren't very smart, are you? I told that for now, it is out of your understanding, and if you want to carry on with your ordinary life and become the strongest ninja to ever exist, all you have to do is listen to me. Why do I want to help you? Because there isn't anything else to do, and I know you well enough to say that you have a pure soul. Not like the trash I had to consume for the majority of my existence. Over time, it will begin changing, but I will be there to guide you and tell you how to avoid making mistakes. Now carry on with your life, Naruto, while I look after you. Think of me as your second godfather. Naruto stood still and tried to think if he should or shouldn't tell Jiraiya about what just happened. Maybe his old man will think that he is going crazy for hearing voices in his head? Even though he was certain that the voice that he heard belonged to a real demon. But then again, demon looking after him? What sort of crazy ideas was he getting? He shook his head and rapidly blinked, head spinning from what just occurred. He tried calling Shinigami in his head, "Oi, Shinigami-san. Where are you?" But he didn't receive any response even after a few attempts, so he gave up. He could go to the library and read about Shinigami, but, reading was never his forte. If he wasn't about to tell Gigi about it, he could ask someone else, though he only knew a handful of adults. Sarutobi? Kakashi? Yeah, Kakashi seemed like the best choice. What with his porn addiction and complete inability to pay attention to things whenever he was reading his favorite books. Sorry, Mom and Dad, but I have to do something. He addressed his parents' graves and bowed. A look around. Jiraiya was still visiting his friends, so Naruto had to shout. Oi, Gigi, I'm going to see Kakashi. Do you know where he is? He is probably in his favorite pub. I saw him return from his week-long mission yesterday. Gaki, came Jiraiya's reply, and Naruto couldn't tell where the voice was coming from, but it didn't matter. For all he knew, his old man could have created a few dozens of shadow clones and told them to look after him by hiding in the nearby trees. That's just the kind of person the infamous Sannin was. Okay, I will see you later on. And don't forget about the ice cream, you still owe me some. With these words, Naruto lowered his head, kissed the white chrysanthemum on their graves and whispered, "I love you," before running off. Refreshing morning air hitting him right in the face and his mouth stretching into a wicked smile. It was mere minutes after he was called to the human world and Shinigami didn't know where he was. One minute he was consuming Minato Namikaze's soul and the next he was sucked into some sort of vessel. He lived for such a long time and he was used to complete darkness, and sometimes he even had to stay without light for years, but it didn't mean that it made Shinigami's experience any more pleasant. Despite what people thought, darkness was worse than death. Death meant the end of one's short life, but darkness meant nothingness, complete silence and isolation. For him, darkness wasn't anything good because there weren't any souls that he was able to consume. Humans called him through a jutsu and he ate 2 souls. Or more, if the one that called him used shadow clones. At no cost for him. What more could a god ask for? All the other gods that he knew or met even once carried out a very different existence to his, and most of them, like Hachiman, his distant relative, had to spend a lot of their time watching humans, unlike himself who spent his time far, far away from humans. It was easier this way. Humans were loud and they constantly thrived to fight and kill, enduring into a never-ending hurricane of drama, passion and blood. Most of the souls he ate belonged to those warriors, or ninjas, as they called themselves nowadays, so he knew a lot about their motives and goals. Some time passed by and the darkness began to slowly dissipate. Shinigami found himself standing in the middle of a long dark green corridor with hundreds of doors on each side. Looking down, he couldn't see the floor because it was covered in thick smoke. It looked nothing like the temple that he lived in for so many years, the temple that he had a hard time to obtain and take away from a bunch of ignorant spirits. No, his temple was a work of art after he began living there and made a few small changes. It practically screamed, "The god of death resides here," what with countless shadows all over the place and whisper, constant whisper that would scare off anyone with even a tip-bit of sanity left over. Shinigami liked to keep his possessions to himself, and his temple was no exception. He began walking straight, his long white hair flying behind him as if searching for something. In reality, his hair, just like the rest of his body, was filled with power and it acted as his sensory field, looking out for anything remotely alive. Humans had chakra, but gods were much higher than that. Their powers didn't have a label, for they were so diverse and so magnificent that not a single human being would be able to fully comprehend them. Or control them, for that matter. And now, just like always, Shinigami's hair was trying its hardest to find something that would get him out of here. Although he was able to teleport himself out of here in a matter of a second, which he did on countless occasions, he wasn't certain about the distance and just how big this building really was. He kept walking, though he didn't know for how long. Not that time mattered to him anyway. It was only a thing created by humans to measure how much of it they have left. Shinigami has noticed long ago that humans were too picky and curious for their own good, and they just had to know when, how or where. Gods didn't have those needs due to their immortality. When you are immortal, time is only a concept that would tell you approximately how much is left until your next meal, and Shinigami was no different. He passed by hundreds of doors, his mind at complete ease and his legs moving on their own accord. Maybe a few days passed by, maybe a few weeks, but at some point in time he was finally able to reach something. And this something turned out to be a pair of tall and golden gates with a seal in the middle. Shinigami wasn't stupid, and he wasn't human, so impatience wasn't in his nature. So he stood good 20 meters away from those gates, his hands at his sides and his eyes set straight on the seal. He knew a lot about them, and this seal looked fresh, like it was put in place quite recently, but he could only guess what was hidden behind the bars. A strong wind from behind interrupted his concentration and made him look up. Something was moving behind these bars after feeling this wind. Or, rather, someone. At first, there was a loud, animalistic roar which shook the ground that Shinigami stood on. It was followed by a strong wave of chakra, and Shinigami was certain this chakra didn't belong to a human. Oh no, he knew this chakra very well. It belonged to a creature that was blessed by Rikudo Sennin, or as he was called by his parents, Hagoromo Otsutsuki. He refused to call it the same way as Hagoromo has named it, for the 9 tails didn't deserve to have a name. It was simply part of the original 10 tails and had no right to be referred to as a separate being. Now Shinigami could recall what happened before he found himself in that dark corridor. That human, Namikaze Minato, called him to human world and, by diving the 9 tails chakra and placing the yin half in himself, was in the process of placing the yang part in his own child. Shinigami knew that because, moments before consuming Namikaze Minato's soul, he could read his true thought and sense his feelings. His sense of guilt didn't seem to have an end, for he was going to seal off a tailed beast inside his own son, and Shinigami could almost taste how delicious his soul would feel on God's tongue, but that's not what happened. Instead, he was pulled forward by some force, and by the looks of it he was sealed off inside this child's body along with the 9 tails. Before trying to free himself, Shinigami decided to check what could be done about the demon fox in this cage. He didn't mind demons, but there was just something about those tailed beasts that made him instantly sick. He just couldn't look at them without thinking about wiping them off the earth's face. Perhaps it was because they somehow resembled him humans. Under all this chakra, there were feelings that couldn't be controlled and sometimes took over the tailed beasts. Shinigami knew very well what the 9 tails was under its layers and layers of chakra, pure anger and hate. A long time ago, the Kyuubi was full of agony. It was weak and wasn't stronger than its brothers and sisters, but then something happened. Something that turned its existence upside down and made the demon fox stronger than any other tailed beast. 9 tails, show yourself, Shinigami said, loud enough so that the Kyuubi would hear him. For some time, there was no response and no chakra, as if the 9 tails was concentrating it to the point of where all of its chakra became a burning ball that would destroy everything around. Shinigami took a few steps closer and stood right in front of the demon's cage, his palm placed safely on the seal and his gaze set straight on it. It wasn't as complicated as he had thought it would be, and it would probably take him a few hours or so to remove it, if he wished to. However, that's not what he desired in the least, as freeing the 9 tails meant inevitable problems. First of all, they had to talk and he had to find out if there was an easy way of getting out of here. He blinked, and when he opened his eyes, Shinigami stared right into a big red iris with a thin pupil. The demon's mouth was distorted in a mocking sneer which showed his sharp fangs. The 9 tails turned out to be far bigger than Shinigami remembered him to be, but it was expected, for he hasn't seen him since the day that the 10 tails was divided. And back then Kyuubi was a mere baby, his eyes wide in wonder and his ears always up, curious and listening. No, there wasn't much left from that version of the 9 tails, apart from his reddish-orange fur. I see that you aren't afraid of me, Shinigami noted coldly and sneered right back at him, thus revealing his own fangs. He hid his left arm behind himself and held tight onto his sword. He knew that the gates will prevent the 9 tails from jumping right at him, but a little cautiousness didn't harm. And just in case the tailed beast was getting, in which case he would just cut his tails, one by one. If I were to meet you while we were still out there, absolutely free and having our powers with us, I would be, the 9 tails admitted out loud and casually laid down right before he case, placing one of his paws over another as if he was relaxing. Perhaps he was, but that didn't make any sense to Shinigami. As it is, I am here and you are there, so you can't touch me and consume my chaw. Why aren't you angry? Kyuubi snorted and orange bubbles around him that were filled with chakra began bursting, one by one. So Shinigami was right. Kyuubi didn't lose all of his chakra and, along with having the bigger part of it reside within him, the 9 tails could produce small amounts of it outside his body and control it. I've been here for a week, and not to say that I got accustomed to it, but I decided to save my anger for later. I already used up too much of it in the first 2 days. You can't imagine how awful these gates looked right after my attacks. But the thing was that Shinigami could imagine it. He had a vivid imagination and he could almost see how all of Kyuubi's angry attacks were directed towards these poor gates. He shifted his right palm from the seal and moved it over the golden bars, his long nails scraping the perfectly looking gates. It seemed that the seal had the ability to recover itself and, if he didn't know better, Shinigami would have assumed that it was only put in place a few hours ago. So they do get affected by chakra, Shinigami whispered to himself and licked his lips in deep concentration. It would be unrealistic for them to be resistant to all sorts of chakra. The 9 tails grumbled with annoyance and scraped his paw over bars from his side. But it doesn't matter. I will wait and get out of here quite soon. What about you? The question is, have you figured out how to get out of here, seeing as I have no intentions of helping you, cheap imitation of God? Shinigami gave out a deep, throaty laugh, though it resembled a sound of chains being dragged against each other. He let go of his katana and instead spread his arms like one would do to embrace someone, but the venomous smile on his face didn't mean anything good for the 9 tails. Instead of giving him a proper response, Shinigami clenched and unclenched his fists, and a strong wave knocked the Kyuubi right over, despite his weight and the overall magnificent size. Say what you like, demon fox, but nature is on my side, he sneered and let his arms drop. These gates mean nothing to me, so you better answer my questions before something happens. You should know that I can pour God's powers into that seal and make sure you never get out of here. You can't do that, Kyuubi growled at him, picking himself up and no longer looking as relaxed as he did moments ago. You are trapped here, just like me, which means that you don't have your full powers with you. On the very contrary, I do. Are you begging me for demonstration? The wind that knocked you off was nothing but a child's play, Nine Tails. Shinigami began walking alongside the bars, lightly scraping them with his nails, and his face was no longer as demonic as it was seconds ago. By now, you should have already realized that half of your power, the one that was placed inside the yang part, that is, was taken away and placed inside Namikaze Minato. You, however, have no chance of regaining it when, or if, you get out of here, seeing as I have consumed his very soul. The Nine Tails no longer looked that arrogant, on the contrary, his eyes were finally showing the first glint of anger. A little push in the right direction and the Kyuubi will lose his cool and will run inside his cage like crazy, hitting the golden bars and burning himself in the process. Lies, you can spill his soul. Hagoromo Otsutsuki installed everything that he knew inside our heads, and I know that the death god can spill one's soul like it's nothing, especially if it hasn't been consumed that long ago. Shinigami shook his head, his mind finally at ease. The damn Kyuubi didn't seem to know how to get out of here, despite his false statement, or he knew but it would take a long time. Although the death god didn't care about time, he preferred to spend it somewhere else and free, given the chance. As it was, there was only one thing he could do if he planned to stay here without getting crazy because of the demon fox and his chakra. He had to consume him, just like he would consume a usual soul. The only disadvantage in this seemingly perfect plan was that he had never consumed a demon's soul before, for they didn't have souls per se. They had twisted forms of spirits that didn't fill him up, and humans would compare it to a taste of bleach, or something along these lines. There was also a fact that, quite naturally, he never tried consuming a tailed beast before, never had an occasion, is what he would say if one of deities would ask him on the topic. Did it taste the same as demon's soul, or did it have a note of human-like soul inside? Was it that easy to consume a Kyuubi to begin with? He licks his lips once again, stopped striding and slowly turned around, his face mere centimeters from the beast's cage. Shinigami was going to be the first creature to ever consume tailed beast's soul, truly consume, though it was only its half. Seeing as Minato sealed off the yin part within himself, however, Shinigami thought that it was accurate to assume that it meant that the yin part resided within himself, too. Of course, it was only his assumption, but the laws of space meant nothing to him. Even though the yin part wasn't directly consumed by him, Minato's soul within him meant just that. So, it was only fair that the yang part was going to join it and complete the picture. Without missing a beat, Shinigami clasped his hands and rose them in a praying-like manner. He then began to vigorously chant something under his nose, and the look of deep concentration on his face made the Nine Tails squint. He tried to read what the half-assed god was mumbling under his breath. It took him a few seconds to realize that it wasn't some harmless praying, and another few seconds to back away, to the furthest point of the cage, roaring and hitting everything around him uncontrollably. In times like this, the Kyuubi was taken over by his raw emotions and instincts. After dividing the 10 tails into 9 different tailed beasts, each adopted a particular human trait, unwillingly, of course, as they were assigned to them by their so-called father Hagoromo. And quite unfortunately, Kurama was the last one to be named, thus the last one to adopt a character trait. And while his brothers and sisters were lucky enough to adopt somewhat harmless ones, he was left with anger. So now, when he knew that there was no way out of here, not with a god that wanted to consume him, he resorted to the one emotion that he all about. Anger. He trashed himself against the walls, not caring enough about his physical body and knowing damn well that the bruises would be healed in seconds and his bright orange fur will grow right back on. It always did. The Nine Tails knew that it was pointless, but he began hitting his tails against the nearby walls in the darker corner of his cage, which made sparkles and the mere grains of his demon chakra fly in all possible directions, but never flying behind the bars and never coming anywhere near the goddamn seal. Look at you, the supposedly strong Nine Tails that destroyed villages and killed thousands of people, Shinigami said when he finished his whispering and bared his fangs in a semblance of a smile. It is far better to be a fake god than it is to be a small fox that doesn't know its place, Kyuubi. Are you certain that there is nothing you want to tell me before I eat your soul? Which will mean that I will know everything that you currently know. The Nine Tails, however, has lost his ability to think rationally and didn't pause even for a second, repeatedly hitting the walls and producing large amounts of chakra without realizing. Even if his true self thought about cooperating, The anger that was sealed off inside him prevented the Kyuubi from clearing his mind and negotiating with the almighty Shinigami. Thus, the choice was made, and Shinigami took a few steps back, his sword out of the sheath and pointing at the nine tails. "Let's dance, demon fox," he said and guffawed, and his cackling didn't mean anything good for the nine tails. Before Kurama knew it, Shinigami took off, his sword and his white garments swirling as he was getting closer to his target. The Kyuubi wasn't certain, but he could swear that he saw a series of cursed sealed on Death God's arms before he, quite unexpectedly, went right through the gates. "These flimsy bars right here? They mean nothing to me if I don't want them to," Shinigami said before raising his sword and cutting off one of the Kyuubi's tails in a blink of an eye. For the nine tails, everything was a blur. He thought of attacking his opponent, of slicing him into many pieces with his chakra, or his tails, whichever one was more useful, but his physical shell refused to comply. His mind and body didn't act together, and the nine tails could only assume that it was all Shinigami's fault, and whatever it was that he chanted made Death God's target completely useless. Nonetheless, this didn't last for long, for Kurama's anger reached its peak and nothing could have even the slightest control over his body. He struggled to jump and eat the Death God alive just yet, though his mind was full of colorful images, all of which included Shinigami's lifeless body between his teeth, Kyuubi's sharp teeth slicing right through his stomach, and his garments being turned to mere shreds that were picked up by wind and were thrown all over the place. For now, he was only able to use his tails, his remaining 8 tails, so he made all of them attack his target at once. Shinigami avoided his attack, jumping over his tails and using their tips as his support in doing so. This was the most frustrating thing about fighting a god, because, like demons, they didn't possess bodies as weak as humans did. Gods weren't affected by demon chakra and they weren't burned alive at the single contact with it, instead treating it like a gush of warm water that felt really nice on one's skin. Kurama swore under his breath and this time made his tails spiral and attack Shinigami from 8 different sides, but this turned out to be pointless, too, when Shinigami used his sword as some sort of a magnet and, by pointing right in the middle, where demons' tails wouldn't reach him in time, pulled himself forward, thus ignoring all of the attacks and getting out of the trap just in time. The Death God proceeded to take out Tonto in the process of jumping down. When he was centimeters away from falling to the ground, he was able to maneuver and turn himself upside down, aiming for Kyuubi's foot. This made his sword pierce deep into Kurama's right foot and all of his weight rested on the arm that was holding his sword. While the nine tails cried out, it was a cry full of wrath, rather than pain or anything else. Shinigami used his other hand that held Tonto to push himself upwards and fly off his foot, leaving his sword behind, good 40 centimeters inside the beast's foot. For Shinigami, it was a matter of being quick enough and cutting off all of Kyuubi's tails before the latter one was finally able to move. When all of his tails were gone, the Death God will be able to consume his soul without the threat of being attacked and thrown to the side, which, he knew for a fact, Shinigami wanted so much. And so, he smirked to himself and rushed towards his enemy's tails, his hand holding tightly onto the old-fashioned Tonto. After he invaded the temple a few thousand years ago, Shinigami decided to keep the very few books that he found inside different rooms to himself. As far as he knew, most of them were written by humans who lived here long before he stepped his foot inside this temple, for they were long since gone, afraid but smart enough to understand that it no longer belonged to them. And even agnostics and atheists accepted that it was now occupied by someone far more magnificent and stronger than them. He disliked most humans and he didn't think there will ever be anything that will change his opinion about them, but books shone some light on what exactly those human beings were. They were curious, first and foremost, and this curiosity has meant death for many. They were also rather reserved, and preferred to keep their own thoughts to themselves. Although this was becoming less and less true with each century as innovations and ideas became welcome. But the one thing he did like about these books was their detailed description of humans and their minds. What else would the books, found in temple, be about, really? Cooking? No, most of them described, albeit quite vaguely at some times and with too many details at other times, human spirit and how it was connected with one's mind. Shinigami could recall himself chuckling when he flipped through the first few pages of one of these books, having found them absurd for their extremely abstract nature. There was no evidence supporting their ideas and beliefs. Essentially, humans lived their lives, believing in something that they made up, and then claimed that they understood the world that surrounded them, based on these inaccurate assumptions. It wasn't only the spirit and mind, it was also their concept of time, space and freedom, with the latter two being too complex for simple human minds to even begin comprehending. Over time, however, he decided to pick another book and began skim reading, looking for something that would catch his attention. And there it was. The old religion, the one that emerged long ago, centuries before the creation of the so-called chakra, was, for the lack of other words, chakra's birthplace. This religion's ideas and concepts were what later came to be referred to as ninjutsu and genjutsu, both of which were simply emerging from chakra. Not only this, but that book also explained, in maximum details, what would happen to the world if chakra were to disappear one day. And Shinigami took a note of it, storing this bit of information for later. And so it happened that this, later, was now. He already figured out that he was sealed off inside a little human boy. That is, from consuming the 9 tails, which made all of Demon's memories and knowledge transfer to him. The seal that was placed on the demon fox was nothing, comparing to the one that the one Namikaze Minato accidentally used on him. Oh no, this seal was eternal. This seal ensured that he stayed inside his boy until his very death, and even after that, spending the rest of eternity in his corpse, even after there was nothing left of this human but bones. He would forever be stored in this mind hallway, or swords. Humans had a saying which implied that humans die but their minds and ideas don't, and Shinigami had a right to say that this was highly accurate. Because of this seal, he will always stay inside this particular hallway, although after this human's death it will no longer remain physical, and only the remains of this seal. As a result, there were 2 ways to go around this seal. Wait until the boy grows up, has kids and all that other stuff that people wanted to have in their lives, and then dies, thus meaning the loss of the physical constraint, so he had one less barrier to worry about and had slim, but a chance nonetheless to break out of here. Of course, he would have to wait until the boy dies in a natural manner, as he simply couldn't kill him from this place in boy's mind. He didn't have enough control over the rest of boy's body. Another exit from this situation was trickier, but required less time, though it was also quite risky. After consuming the demon's soul, and proving himself right, indeed, his soul tasted like bleach, but like a bleach that was set on fire. There were small remains of chakra inside boy's body, just enough to ensure that he is breathing and his whole body is functioning correctly. In a perfect situation, Shinigami would be able to access all parts of this body, but right now he was residing within boy's mind, thus was only able to more or less control his brain and everything inside it, which included chakra. If he went around this corridor and visited every single room in boy's mind, and there were plenty of those, mind you, he would be able to suck all remains of chakra in boy's mind, which would likely lead to brain death, thus boy's death, exactly what he needed. The only danger of this plan, besides the fact that it would take him at least 10 years to go around this whole corridor, was that, by sucking all of this chakra inside himself, he will be left poisoned by the time he gets out of here. Chakra wasn't something that was practiced by gods, therefore their bodies weren't used to receiving large numbers of chakra all at once. Eating souls was a different thing altogether. The god didn't receive any of his victims' chakra as it was lost somewhere in the process of consuming a soul. However, before doing anything else, he had to go and thoroughly explore the place that he was stuck in for quite some time, starting now. Shinigami hid his sword and Tanto, stepped over the lifeless body that once belonged to the Kyuubi and made his way out of the cage by simply going through the gates like there was nothing on his way. He didn't realize it before, or maybe it happened after he consumed Demon Fox's soul, he couldn't tell for sure, but this room was flooded with water that would reach average humans' ribs. For Shinigami, however, it was nothing more but a little puddle, though he felt the ends of his garment soaking and it was quickly getting annoying. Not that he let his emotions take over him, but he held no desire in having his only piece of clothing soak in some muddy water. Shinigami left the room, only to stand in the middle of the corridor once again, and began walking, all the while whistling some tune under his nose and occasionally scraping his nails over the walls. His hair stayed down the whole time, so the death god was certain. He was the only one here, and he could only hope that the boy's mind will expand and reach these corridors sooner or later. Back to present, Naruto is 4.5. You have a voice inside your head that keeps talking to you? Kakashi asked, just to make sure, and even stuck his pinky in his ear as if he was clearing out all the dirt out of it. He was turning 19 in a few days, which made him 1 year closer to legal age, thus he could drink and read porn whenever he felt like it. But then again, it wasn't like he wasn't doing all of these things already. There weren't many people who were brave enough to stand up to him and tell him to stop doing those immoral things, so he lived his life to the fullest, as some would label it. In reality, though, here he was, an attractive, he knew that much about his physique, ninja that decided to go back to being a jonin a few weeks ago. Being an Anbu was just too tiring. So where were all attractive females that kept throwing themselves at him, like they did in Jiraiya Sensei's book? None, nada, exactly zero. Instead, he was sitting here, completely alone, before a 4 years old decided to join him. Yep, that's what he got for all these years of hard work. Some loudmouth kid instead of hot females. Not that he was interested in pursuing any, for that matter, it was only to boost his ego. Bah, he knew that he sounded like some creepy old man, but he just couldn't help himself. Instead, he blamed his own bad traits on Icha series. TSS's, don't shout about it. Naruto whispered angrily and quickly turned his head around, making sure that no one heard Kakashi's words. He didn't need more glances from adults who thought of him as a low-life as it was. Making them think that he going mental wasn't going to make situation any better. Yeah, I don't think that he's going to harm me, though. He sounded really nice and friendly. And so do pedophiles, Kakashi whispered under his nose and took another shot of sake. His vision becoming a blur and he practically slurred his next words. He was already half drunk when Naruto arrived here and began waving his arms and shouting something like, "Wake up! And, I have to tell you about something huge." Well, that's what he got for being so close with Boy's godfather, though receiving side copies of Icha before anyone else was a big bonus which made him get used to the idea of having some white-haired kid around himself. But Naruto, you should understand that it can't be Shinigami. He's the god of death. He can't be captivated within some human. You think that I'm that stupid, pervert Kakashi? Came Boy's response, which made Naruto's eyes widen and he quickly covered his mouth with his hands. He didn't mean to let Kakashi know about the name that he has given him inside his head. Not that he was afraid of punishment, after all, Kakashi wasn't the one to talk or gossip, especially if it concerned telling some that some 4 years old called him a pervert right to his face. The worst case scenario was Gigi finding out, and that wasn't so bad, too. Maybe, a week or so without ramen, no big deal. Oh, God, what had he done? If I was a bit more sober, Kakashi finally let out with a hiccup, I would have simply turned around and left you alone, calling you a freak or something. But because your godfather writes my favorite series and I don't want to get on his bad side by stealing you away and leaving you in the middle of a big forest, I will ignore it. Just this once though. Naruto waved his hand as if it wasn't a big deal, though his insides were screaming, Yahoo! And, finally having Gigi as my old man led to something besides constant beating from females. Yeah, whatever. Are you going to help me, then? What can it be, if it's not a Shinigami? Kakashi clicked his tongue and ran his fingers through his hair, which made his gray locks look even messier than before. Ladies would call it bed hair, but he resorted to referring to it as a "I'm really drunk and I probably fell down my chair a few times" hair. There were a few possible explanations as to what this could mean. He was one of the few who were informed of everything that has happened before and after the Nine Tails was sealed off inside Naruto, so he knew of what the present Hokage, Sandaime-sama, saw, and that was Shinigami being sealed off inside Naruto along with the demon fox because his own teacher made a few mistakes in hand seals. The council even forced Hokage to run a few tests on Naruto when he was as young as 7 months since his birth. Some of them were nasty, and some of them were completely harmless, but they didn't detect anything that was wrong with Naruto, apart from the fact that he didn't have any chakra and there was a big, black hole inside him. That said, hole was sucking in every bit of chakra that his body was producing, from what a group of Hyugas could tell, but they weren't completely certain. It seemed that Shinigami was consuming Naruto's chakra, but for what reason? Did the death god need chakra in order to survive? No one truly knew, for no one has encountered real gods in the last 100 or so years, apart from calling Shinigami via a very specific jutsu. So maybe there was a death god inside this kid, and maybe he was beginning to communicate with Naruto through their mental link, but who knew? Maybe all of it was Naruto's vivid imagination. Maybe the Shinigami got away long ago, and only left a small portion of his power behind. Only time and patience will provide answers to those questions, that's what Kakashi thought. There was also a possibility that it was all Kyuubi's fault, and, instead of showing himself to the poor kid, he decided to communicate with him by pretending to be someone else and thus gaining his trust. Perhaps you felt lonely and your brain decided to create an imaginary friend for Ya, was his final response and blinked a few times to stay awake. He knew that it was incredibly tough and unfair to the kid, but Jiraiya, Sarutobi and the other old men in the council prohibited him, and the rest of the village, for that matter, from telling Naruto about the Nine Tails, or even mentioning it. The academy and other civilian schools weren't allowed to teach their students about the attack 4.5 years ago. Council made sure that no history book included this incident, and to a bypasser it would look like the village decided to hide its biggest spider under the rug, pretending it wasn't there although most were aware of it and were told to simply ignore it. When asked about what happened to the fourth Hokage, parents would patiently explain to their children that he died on a mission. This was the kind of mess that Konoha got itself into. I'm serious. And if so, why didn't your brain decide to create a bunch of imaginary friends for you, seeing as you don't have any? Touché, Hitaki replied with a smirk and even put his hand over the place where his heart was. I was hurt right into my heart and don't think that I will ever recover and live a normal life again. Naruto frowned and tucked white strands of his hair behind his ear. It was getting in the way and he just had to have a haircut, though finding a good barber was rather problematic. Maybe he will have to do what he did last time he needed a haircut and Gigi refused to pay for it, claiming that he could do it for him better than any barber. Rather annoyed with his old man, Naruto stole kunai from Jiraiya's pouch and cut his own hair, to the latter's terror. The front of his bangs looked absolutely awful and he had to wear a hat for a few weeks to keep people from staring at him any more than they already were. I don't think that you take me seriously, Kakashi, so I will have to find someone else to talk to about it, Naruto said with a sigh and was just about to leave when he felt steps right behind him and then someone sat on the free chair right next to him. The young boy didn't think that he even needed to turn his head, for his peripheral vision already picked up on the bright green color. Gai-san, Naruto-kun, long time no see, he exclaimed with the widest smile anyone could master, which earned him a few side glances but he didn't seem to notice them, or he simply didn't care. I was passing by when I saw you two sitting here like best friends and chatting without me. Now, it is my duty to find what you were talking about and join you. Kakashi, what were you talking about? Kakashi resisted the urge to roll his eyes and decided to play safe. We were just talking about how amazing your green jumpsuit is and how Naruto wants to get a hold of one, but he can't seem to find his size. Oh, is that so? Guy asked with a sincere concern in his voice and then patted Naruto's head in a fatherly manner. But worry not, Naruto-kun. I will look around and I will find you one of these jumpsuits, or I'm not made a guy. And if I won't find any, I will make it myself. Naruto gave him the look that would make anyone uncomfortable, but apparently not him. The boy liked Kakashi's rival. In fact, sometimes he asked his godfather to hang around with Guy whenever Jiraiya left for missions and was looking for someone that would babysit Naruto, never mind the fact that Guy has turned 18 not that long ago. Then again, he was the best option in all categories. He wasn't a pervert and a drunkhead like Kakashi was. He wasn't always busy with paperwork like Sarutobi was, and, in the end of the day, he was more responsible than most babysitters in Konoha. And as much as Naruto wanted that green jumpsuit, damn, it would make him look so great and strong, he didn't find the needed support from Kakashi, so he had to look for someone else. There weren't many adults that he knew besides these four, plus Inoichi and Noriko, oh, and the owner of Ichiraku. The old man which should have won the award for being the nicest guy years ago. Seriously, he was like a saint. He jumped up from his seat and, blabbering something about going back and checking how's Gigi doing, left the place in a hurry. As always, he had to concentrate on his task at hand and not on the jerks that kept throwing dirty glances at him. He noted long ago that most of them were young mums and it made no sense whatsoever. Did he do something to their kids? Seriously, what was their problem? As he was nearing the Ichiraku stand, Naruto thought about other adults he knew, Fugaku and Makoto, Sasuke's parents. He could recall Makoto dropping by a few times in the last year, but only for a tea and she usually left in a hurry. She only brought her husband with her once, and Naruto hoped that she never did it again. The guy was the equivalent of an ice cube. Forget what he said about Baka Sasuke and his stuck-up attitude, he could clearly see who Sasuke picked up on. Oh, he wished that Sasuke was more like his older brother. He was so gallant and nice to everyone, always holding back what he really thought, but because he was so strong no one dared to say a bad word about him. And Naruto liked it. He wished people around him were more like Itachi. But there was no way in hell he was going to Uchiha's district and seeking out Sasuke's parents. Makoto was so gentle and understanding, so she would probably help him, but what about her husband? He was probably off to work by now, but Naruto didn't want to try his luck. Besides, in order to reach Sasuke's house, he would have to pass by many Uchiha compounds, which meant evil looks from a lot of Uchihas. "Hiya, old man, got some ramen for me?" He shouted at the top of his lungs and landed on the only free seat. Today seemed to be a busy day for Ichiraku. "Sure thing, Naruto," Tucci said with a thumb up and turned his back to him. "The usual, right?" "Yep," Naruto replied with a wide smile and began waving his legs and looking around for familiar faces. To his utter disappointment, there were none. Everyone seemed to be quite busy lately, and he supposed that it had something to do with the upcoming Chunin exams. Heck, he was excited about seeing them, too. Gigi promised to take him there, but only if he behaved. Did he really say that? He overheard someone say but didn't turn his head, instead listening as inconspicuously as he could and looking straight. Fuck, he keeps treating us like dirt. Not only us, the Uchihas, too. "Have you heard of the recent conflict between the head of Uchiha clan and Sandame?" another man said with a dark chuckle. "Trust me, it was something. I swear, if there wasn't a bunch of ANBUs standing nearby, they would have already attacked each other. I wonder what that bastard Fugaku is going to do about it, and don't even get me started on his older son. So I have a friend in Anbu and he told me that Itachi treats everyone like shit, completely ignoring their request, and only listening to what Ibiki and Danzo say. It's crazy, I'm telling ya. If it continues like this, I will be the one that ends those arrogant Uchihas." "Shush, don't be so loud. What if someone overhears you? If Sarutobi finds out, you will be most likely captured and you know damn well who's in charge of Konoha's police. Yeah, these Sharingan-obsessed dogs. I don't care who hears me, as Hyugas are much stronger than Uchihas. Who do they think they are, practically wiping Hokage's ass, patiently waiting for the day when he allows them to take control over the whole village? Now you are just being crazy? Say what you want, but if it continues like this, and remember my words, Uchihas will make their best to get on Hokage's side after recent incident. Sandame will say something like, well, you have been a great help and I think that you should own this village now. Or something. I wonder if it's old age that made him so soft. And what did Hiyashi-san have to say about it? I wasn't present on yesterday's meeting. Oh, you know him. He just blabbered about how the main branch should keep together and be strict on the other branches. Nothing new here, exploitation and inequality right there. Naruto looked away when the two men shifted and, putting a wrinkly bill on the table and thanking the chef, slowly left. The boy could only look over his shoulder when he was sure that they were gone, his mind buzzing with what has just occurred. Surely it was all just talking without actions, right? Sure, he knew the pure basics of Konoha's history, just as he knew about two clans that were always on edge with each other, but wasn't this a bit too much? Should he tell someone about what he just heard or was it really all harmless? Many years passed since Hyugas and Uchihas went into war and killed as many members of the other clan as they could. Naruto naively supposed that it was just history now, covered in dust and hidden somewhere, so as not to harm others. He tried imagining what it would be like if the two clans decided to go into war with each other once again, and shuddered. The mere thought made him sick. No, surely that wouldn't happen. What with Sarutobi around and everything, right? "Here is your miso, Naruto," Ichiraku's owner finally said with a wide smile and put a bowl right in front of Naruto. When he didn't hear an excited, "Yosha, this is the best meal ever," Itadakimasa's Tucci raised his eyebrow. "Naruto, is something bothering you?" The latter only shook his head and stretched his arm to pick up a pair of chopsticks from a wooden cup. "Well, yeah, but you are busy right now. You can ask me anything you want, you know that, right? And you can share whatever it is that is bothering you." Naruto huffed and divided his chopsticks, if you have time during lunch break. Tucci nodded, and about 2 hours later he sat opposite Naruto and began carefully listening to his story, occasionally nodding and asking questions. The fireworks turned out to be amazing. Naruto hasn't been to many of them before, so attending one was a big treat. Well, that and ice cream that he was happily eating now, all thanks to Gigi. He sat on the hill and looked up, with bright green, blue and red reflecting in his dreamy eyes. It was moments like this that he didn't think about the hating gazes on his back, and thoughts like, "Just tell them that you are Hokage's son," plagued his mind. Jiraiya told him about a year ago that he can't tell others who are his real parents, though he didn't elaborate why. Maybe it was because public would laugh at him, not believing his words and claiming that Yondaime didn't have a son. Or maybe it was to keep him safe from jealous kids who wished to have parents like his. Still, he was sure that if only he were to tell others about his real parents, they would stop mocking him, and the hatred will stop. Oh, and there was also that bastard Sasuke. The said guy, by the way, sat a few meters away from him with his family, with his back turned towards Naruto. Unlike the majority, he kept absolutely quiet and stared at the skies without talking to anyone. Not that Naruto was staring or anything. "Oi, Naruto, we didn't see you today," he heard someone say behind him, so Naruto looked over his shoulder and smirked. "I'm sure you spent the majority of the day eating in one of the takeouts," he replied with a chuckle and barely dodged the hit that was going his way. He almost dropped his ice cream in the process, and yelled at Choji for almost making him drop his treat. "Hey, do you know how much this ice cream costs?" "Certainly less than the amount of meat that Choji consumed today." Kiba snickered in response but began quickly waving his hands in front of his face, defending himself from Akamichi's angry gaze. "I'm just joking, just joking. Eat as much meat as you want." Naruto snickered and quickly finished off eating his ice cream. He then stood up and him and Kiba began running from angry Choji, leaving a tired and annoyed Shikamaru behind. The two of them kept running without looking back, and it wasn't long before they reached the quiet part of the city with small alleyways. Besides, most people were out in the park, watching fireworks and spending their free time with their loved ones. At the cross, Kiba waved at Naruto and signaled him that he was turning right and motioned Naruto to turn leftwards. The latter one nodded and did as he was told, not stopping for a second. He enjoyed living and didn't want to dispose of his own life anytime soon. "Thank you very much." However, it wasn't long before Naruto began slowing down and looking around. He knew most of the small alleyways in Konoha, and this one wasn't an exception, but sometimes he got lost in them, like right now. He forced himself to stop and look around, but there were 4 possible directions. Which one was he going to? Before he had time to finish his thought, he was abruptly kicked right into his back and he fell to the ground without having the chance to stretch out his arms. Naruto looked over his shoulder, but that someone kicked him in the face before he got the chance to see his attacker. He coughed and tried grabbing his opponent's leg. All was fruitless. The unknown person kept hitting him over and over again. "You are a demonic bastard and you should know your place." Oh, so it was one of the guys who hated him just because he had horns. The boy was used to being sneered at and people who threw evil glances at him just because of his horns, but that was usually as far as it went. Most people were too afraid to lay a finger at him because they knew of his godfather and what he was capable of. The very few, however, that were stupid enough to attack him from time to time usually kicked him a few times and ran away, while he never mentioned it to Jiraiya. He was no snitch. This, however, this was on the whole other level. This was a full-time beating which he didn't think he deserved in the least. Sure, he wasn't the quiet and nice type, and he would occasionally burst out and shout at people for being so arrogant and rude, but he felt that this beating wasn't about that. No, he was only hit because he was different. Hit. Another. Again. The beating continued for another 15 minutes or so with that guy, and his pals, it seems, hitting his back with their shoes. They didn't even hold him down, and there was no need to, after all, for their hitting was harsh enough to make him lay on the ground and move as little as possible. Naruto coughed and could no longer control his own arms and legs. The fingers on his right hand kept trembling when he tried to clench them into a fist. His left hand felt absolutely numb, for one of these bastards stepped on it and kept denting it to the ground. The boy couldn't miss the sound of his fingers cracking, and he knew that it wasn't possible, but he could swear that he could feel his blood slowly seeping out of his left hand. Strong metallic smell hit his nose just as he felt his eyesight blur, and Naruto wanted to choke once again, 4-year-olds weren't used to the smell of blood, and he was no exception. He didn't whine or cry out for help, not anymore. He couldn't find it in himself to struggle anymore, so he simply laid there and felt as his blue eyes began to slowly close. A freak with white hair and horns. Demon. It took him a few seconds to realize that there was a trail of blood running down his cheek, and by that time he was already on a verge of fainting. There was no one around that would help him, even if he still had power to shout. "I can help you." That voice again. Naruto closed his eyes as tightly as he could and called out for Shinigami. "How can you help me? You are inside me, so you can't attack them, right?" "That's true, but I can control your body for you and beat them to a bloody pulp." "How would you like that?" Gigi said that I shouldn't. "Forget what your old man said, there isn't a better alternative than to answer to hatred with hate. We don't live in a loving, a peaceful world, kid. It's full of pain and suffering, and the best we can do is fight right back instead of taking the blow and not hitting back. In a fight, you hit your opponent, right? You should do the same thing in your life. You should fight without holding back, because the moment you do, you are dead." Naruto's eyelids lowered, his mind buzzing with whether or not he should allow some god, actually, the death god himself, to take over his body. The darker side of his mind finally awoke and had no intentions of leaving him alone, whispering awful thing into his ear. "But you want them to suffer. You want them to pay for this beating. Why do they get away with it over and over again? And what if their beating will result in you not being able to use one of your limbs anymore? Or worse, you will be income. Is this what you want? Be a nice guy, and allow them to continue their stupid and pathetic lives like they didn't just beat the hell out of some innocent boy? Is that what you want?" No, he didn't want that. He wanted to become stronger and become like his Gigi, so his future plans didn't include being beaten up by a group of some messed up kids. The boy opened his eyes, his lips barely moving. "You can take over my body?" Shinigami smirked to himself, because everything was going as he planned. It was lucky of him to be able to communicate with Namikaze Naruto when he was still so young, as so easy to persuade. The death god didn't doubt that if their connection formed much later, it would lead to inevitable consequences for both of them. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to kill the kid in order to get out. Oh, yeah, he could work with this. For now, sleep, Namikaze Naruto. You need to rest. When he woke up an hour or so later, he was surrounded by a pile of unconscious bodies, all of them beaten up so much that Naruto doubted they would be able to move anytime soon. Not having enough power to get up, he decided to close his eyes and lay there for a little longer, his mind completely ignoring the burning in his knuckles that were used to nearly kill those kids. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.